The baby's cry sliced through the hallway just as the front door slammed shut. Marisol dropped the folded sheets from her arms and ran. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Her feet moved on instinct, pounding against the marble floor as the crying grew louder, sharper, panicked. When she reached the nursery, she froze. Vivian Cross stood beside the crib, already lifting the baby, her face tight with irritation. "Give her to me," Marisol said breathlessly, reaching out. "She just needs feeding. Please." Vivian turned slowly, her eyes flashing. "I said I would handle it." The baby whimpered, tiny hands trembling in the air. "You're hurting her," Marisol said, her voice breaking. "Please." "I'm not hurting anyone," Vivian snapped. "I'm doing what needs to be done." Marisol's heart pounded. She had worked in this house for 12 years. She had seen anger, grief, arrogance. But this cold resolve, terrified her. "Mr. Vale wouldn't want this," Marisol whispered. At the mention of his name, Vivian's lips curved into a thin smile. "Mr. Vale isn't here." And that was when Marisol understood. Something irreversible was already in motion. If you want stories that pull you into moments like this and don't let go, make sure you're subscribed, because this one only gets darker from here. Earlier that morning, everything had seemed normal. The mansion was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from too much space and too few people. Adrian Vale had flown out before sunrise for an emergency board meeting, leaving the house under Vivian's watch. Officially, she was the future mistress of the estate. Unofficially, she had been waiting for this moment. The baby, Lily, had arrived in their lives 6 months earlier, wrapped in tragedy. Adrian's sister and her husband had been killed instantly in a crash that made headlines for a week before the world moved on. Only the baby survived. Adrian hadn't hesitated. He brought Lily home, turned an entire wing of the mansion into a nursery, and quietly canceled several international trips. The media praised him. The public adored him. Vivian smiled for the cameras. Behind closed doors, she counted. She counted how many hours Adrian spent with the baby. She counted how many decisions he postponed because Lily was sick or fussy. She counted how many times he said, "Later, Vivian. She needs me." At first, she told herself it was temporary. Babies grew up. Babies became children. Children became background noise. But Lily didn't fade. She became the center. Marisol noticed it early. She noticed how Vivian never volunteered to feed the baby unless someone was watching. How she flinched when Lily cried. How her voice sharpened when Adrian carried the baby during phone calls. One evening, Marisol overheard Vivian speaking to her reflection in the hallway mirror. "This wasn't the plan," Vivian said quietly. None of this was. Marisol had pretended not to hear. That was her job. Silence kept her employed. But silence was becoming impossible. The engagement announcement came 2 weeks later. A lavish dinner. Crystal glasses. Cameras flashing as Adrian slid the ring onto Vivian's finger. Applause echoed through the hall as Vivian leaned into him, smiling flawlessly. "She's perfect," guests whispered. Marisol stood near the back, holding Lily, who gurgled softly, unaware of the tension tightening around her like a rope. When a guest asked, laughing, "So when's the baby getting a role in the wedding?" Vivian's smile faltered, just for a second. "She won't," Vivian replied smoothly. Children don't belong in ceremonies like that. Adrian glanced at her, surprised. We can talk about it later. Vivian squeezed his hand too hard. Of course. That night, after the guests left, Vivian didn't go to bed. She went to her office. Marisol, passing by with fresh linens, heard voices inside. You said this wouldn't be an issue, Vivian said sharply. A man replied, his voice low and professional. Circumstances change. The child complicates things. I don't want complications, Vivian said. I want solutions. There was a pause. There are options, the man said carefully. But they require discretion. Marisol felt cold spread through her chest. What kind of options? Vivian asked. Quiet ones. The next morning, Vivian was different. Calmer. Focused. She kissed Adrian goodbye with unusual warmth, watched his car disappear down the drive, then turned to the staff. You may all take the afternoon off, she said. I want privacy. Marisol's stomach twisted. She had tried to ignore the warning signs. She had tried to believe she was imagining things. But as Vivian dismissed the staff one by one, Marisol stayed rooted in place. I'll remain, Marisol said softly. The baby needs. I said everyone, Vivian cut in. Marisol swallowed. With respect, Mr. Vale asked me to stay with Lily at all times. Vivian stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Fine, she said. You can stay. That smile was worse than anger. Hours later came the cry. The slammed door. The moment Marisol now stood in, watching Vivian hold the baby like a burden she was tired of carrying. Give her to me, Marisol pleaded again, tears welling. She's just scared. Vivian looked down at Lily, who was red-faced and shaking. She's not scared, Vivian said. She's inconvenient. The word hit Marisol like a slap. You don't mean that, Marisol whispered. She's a baby. Vivian stepped away from the crib, rocking Lily just enough to keep her quiet, not enough to comfort her. You think I don't know what you're thinking? Vivian said. You think I don't see the way everyone looks at her? Like she's some miracle. Like she matters more than I do. She's his family, Marisol said. And soon you will be too. Vivian laughed softly. That's what frightens me. Marisol moved closer. Please, she begged. Whatever you're planning, stop. Vivian's eyes hardened. You should be very careful, she said. You're crossing a line. I don't care, Marisol said, voice shaking. I've raised children. I've buried one. I won't stand by and watch. Vivian's voice snapped like ice. You will do exactly that. The baby let out another cry. Vivian sighed as if annoyed, and pressed a button on her phone. Within minutes, a black car pulled into the drive. Marisol's breath caught. Who is that? Vivian didn't answer. Two strangers entered the house. A man and a woman, both dressed plainly, both avoiding eye contact. This is unnecessary, Marisol said, stepping in front of the door. Mr. Vale needs to be informed. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. Move. No. For a moment, neither woman moved. The baby's cries filled the silence. Then Vivian leaned in close to Marisol's ear. If you interfere, she said quietly, you'll never work in this city again. Marisol trembled. She thought of her son, of the bills, of everything she could lose. Then she looked at Lily, and stepped aside. As the strangers took the baby, Marisol collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "You don't understand what you're doing," she cried. "You'll destroy him." Vivian adjusted her jacket, composed once more. "No," she said calmly. "I'm saving myself." The car drove away. The nursery fell silent. And somewhere deep in the mansion, a clock began counting down, toward a truth that would shatter every illusion Vivian had built. Stay with this story, because what happens next is where everything escalates, and where the real secret behind that baby begins to surface. The silence after the car left was unbearable. Marisol sat frozen in the nursery, her hands clenched in her apron, staring at the empty crib. The mobile above it still spun slowly, playing a soft tune meant to soothe the baby who was no longer there. "She didn't even take the blanket," Marisol whispered to herself. "She didn't even." Her breath hitched, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stop herself from crying out loud. Years of working in wealthy homes had taught her one thing above all else. Grief was tolerated only when it was quiet. Footsteps echoed behind her. Vivian stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression smooth and unbothered. "You're dismissed for the day," Vivian said. "Go home." Marisol looked up at her, eyes red. "Where did you take her?" Vivian tilted her head. "That's not your concern." "She's a baby," Marisol said hoarsely. "She needs familiar faces. She needs to be elsewhere," Vivian cut in. "And she is." Marisol pushed herself to her feet. "Adrian will notice. He'll ask questions." "And I'll answer them," Vivian said coolly. "I've arranged for her to be placed in a private care facility. Temporary. That's all he needs to know." "That's a lie," Marisol said, her voice trembling. "Those people weren't from any facility." Vivian stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're very close to overstepping." Marisol swallowed. "Please. Call him. Tell him the truth." Vivian's face hardened. "If you say one word to Adrian before I do, you'll regret it." The threat hung heavy between them. Marisol knew then that pleading would no longer work. Vivian had crossed a line she could not step back from, and she would drag anyone down who stood in her way. Marisol left the mansion that evening feeling like she was abandoning Lily all over again. Adrian returned late that night. Vivian met him at the door, her eyes already glossy, her voice soft and shaken. "Adrian," she said, rushing into his arms. "Something happened today." His body went rigid instantly. "What's wrong? Is Lily?" "She was overwhelmed," Vivian said quickly. "The crying, the stress. I thought it was best to have her evaluated. Just for a few days." "What do you mean, evaluated?" Adrian asked, pulling back. "Where is she?" "At a discreet care center," Vivian replied. "Highly recommended. I handled everything." Adrian stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. "You took her without telling me?" "I was trying to help," Vivian said, tears spilling now. "You've been exhausted. You won't admit it, but I see it." Adrian ran a hand through his hair. "You had no right." "I'm your fiancée," Vivian said, gripping his arm. "We're building a life together." "I thought." "You thought wrong," Adrian snapped. He turned and walked toward the nursery. The moment he saw the empty crib, something inside him broke. "Where is she?" he demanded again, his voice low and dangerous. Vivian followed him in. "She's safe." That's not an answer. Vivian hesitated. Just long enough. Adrian turned slowly. "You don't know exactly where she is, do you?" "She's being cared for," Vivian insisted. "Why are you interrogating me like this?" "Because Lily is my responsibility," Adrian said. "And you just made a decision that wasn't yours to make." The argument escalated quickly. Voices raised. Accusations thrown. Vivian accused Adrian of neglecting their future. Adrian accused Vivian of crossing boundaries. "You're choosing her over me," Vivian cried. "She's a child," Adrian shouted. "What kind of comparison is that?" Vivian fell silent. That silence scared him more than the shouting. "I need to see her," Adrian said firmly. "Now." Vivian wiped her tears, her voice steadying. "It's late. Tomorrow." "No," Adrian said. "Now." Vivian stepped back. "Adrian, please." "Now," he repeated. For the first time, Vivian panicked. "I don't have the address," she admitted. "I used a private intermediary. For privacy." Adrian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You gave my niece to strangers," he said slowly. "They're professionals," Vivian said quickly. "You're overreacting." Adrian pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer." Vivian grabbed his wrist. "Don't. Get your hands off me." "If you do this," Vivian hissed, "you'll destroy everything we've built." Adrian laughed bitterly. "You already did." Meanwhile, Marisol sat awake in her small apartment, staring at her phone. Every instinct screamed at her to act. She thought of Vivian's threat, of her job, of her son's tuition. Then she thought of Lily's tiny hands, reaching out, searching for comfort that never came. Marisol stood up. She put on her coat. And she went back. The gates were still open. The guards barely glanced at her as she hurried inside. She found Adrian in his study, pacing like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he was saying. "I want every record. Every transfer. I don't care how discreet it was." Marisol knocked softly. Adrian turned, startled. "Marisol." She hesitated, then stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I know where she is," Marisol said quietly. Adrian's heart stopped. "What?" Marisol took a shaky breath. "Not exactly. But I know what your fiancé did." Vivian's name hung between them like poison. "She arranged it days ago," Marisol continued. "She met with a man. She planned to send the baby overseas." Adrian's face drained of color. "Overseas?" "She said Lily was in the way," Marisol whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I begged her to stop." Adrian staggered back into his chair. "That's not possible," he muttered. "She wouldn't." "She did," Marisol said. "And there's more." Adrian looked up sharply. Marisol clasped her hands together. "I overheard the lawyer once, after your sister passed, about a trust." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What trust?" Marisol swallowed. "He said Lily was protected, that her inheritance was significant." Adrian's blood ran cold. He had kept that information tightly guarded. Only 2 lawyers knew. How could Vivian know, he whispered, unless she didn't know everything, unless she was acting on instinct greed, fear, without realizing what she was actually touching. Adrian stood abruptly. This changes everything. Within minutes, phones were ringing. Lawyers were summoned. Security was alerted. And Vivian, standing alone in the bedroom upstairs, felt something shift in the house. Power was moving. And for the first time since Lily arrived, it was moving away from her. If you're feeling the tension right now, don't go anywhere, because the next part is where secrets collide and consequences finally arrive. Like the video if you're hooked so far, because what comes next is where everything explodes. Vivian sensed it before anyone spoke to her. The mansion felt different. Too alert, too alive. Doors opened and closed with purpose. Voices whispered where there had once been silence. When she stepped into the hallway, 2 security guards she didn't recognize straightened immediately. "Where is Adrian?" she asked, keeping her tone calm. "He's occupied," one of them replied. Vivian's jaw tightened. Occupied with what? Neither answered. She turned and walked briskly toward the study. The door was closed. Voices filtered through, low, urgent. She recognized Adrian's. Another voice followed, clipped and professional. A lawyer. Vivian reached for the handle. The door opened before she touched it. Adrian stood there, his face unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. Inside the study, Marisol sat quietly in a chair, her hands folded, eyes red but steady. 2 men in suits stood near the desk, folders open. Vivian's heart dropped. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why is she here?" Adrian closed the door behind them. "Because she told me the truth." Vivian laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "The truth? From a maid?" Marisol flinched but didn't speak. Adrian's voice hardened. "Watch your mouth." Vivian's smile vanished. "What exactly do you think you know?" "That you arranged for Lily to be taken," Adrian said. "Without my consent. Without knowing where she was going." "I told you," Vivian snapped. "It was temporary." "You lied," Adrian said. "She was being prepared for international adoption." Vivian froze. For a split second, the mask cracked. "That's absurd," she said quickly. "You're being manipulated." One of the lawyers stepped forward. "Ms. Cross, we have records of communication between you and an intermediary specializing in overseas placements." Vivian's breath hitched. "That proves nothing." "It proves intent," the lawyer replied. Vivian turned on Marisol. "You did this," she hissed. "You had no right." Marisol stood slowly. "I had every right. She's a baby." Vivian's voice rose. "You ruined everything." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You did." Vivian looked at him, really looked, and realized something was wrong. He wasn't angry. He was done. "You don't understand," she said, her voice softening, shifting tactics. "I was protecting us. That child, she would always come first. I would never matter." "She's my niece," Adrian said. "And you tried to erase her." "I was thinking about our future," Vivian insisted. "About the company. About the trust," Adrian interrupted. Vivian's eyes widened despite herself. "You didn't know," Adrian continued. "You didn't even know what you were risking." One of the lawyers opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. "Lily is the sole beneficiary of a controlling trust established by Mr. Vale's sister," he explained. "If Lily had been legally removed from the family, the trust would have dissolved." Vivian stared at the paper, her hands trembling. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You tried to give away the future of this company," Adrian said. "And you didn't even know it." Vivian sank into a chair. For the first time, fear overtook arrogance. "Where is she?" Adrian asked. Vivian shook her head. "I don't know. The intermediary handles." Adrian slammed his hand on the desk. "Where is she?" Vivian broke. She gave them the name, the contacts, the route. Within hours, authorities were involved. Flights were grounded. Paperwork was frozen. And in a quiet room miles away, Lily was found, safe, confused, clinging to a blanket that smelled faintly of home. When Adrian held her again, he didn't speak. He didn't have to. Tears slid silently down his face as Lily pressed her head against his chest, soothed by a heartbeat she recognized. The fallout was immediate. The engagement was canceled before dawn. Sponsors withdrew. Boards distanced themselves. Headlines shifted overnight, from admiration to outrage. Vivian's name became synonymous with scandal. She tried to defend herself publicly. She failed. Every interview made it worse. Every denial contradicted the evidence. And when asked about the baby, she said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. Marisol expected to be dismissed quietly once the chaos settled. Instead, Adrian called her into his office. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have listened sooner." Marisol shook her head. She had power. "I did not." "You had courage," Adrian replied. "That matters more." He offered her a reward. Money. Security. Marisol declined. "I want to stay with Lily," she said. "If you'll allow it." Adrian didn't hesitate. "She needs you." Months passed. The mansion felt warmer. Laughter returned. Small, uneven, but real. Lily grew stronger. Curious. Bright. Marisol was never far from her side. And Adrian learned something he had nearly lost sight of. That love wasn't measured by control or image, but by who stood up when it was hardest. Vivian left the city. No farewell. No apology. Just absence. Years later, Lily ran through the garden, her laughter echoing against the stone walls. Marisol watched from the steps, smiling softly. Somewhere inside the house, Adrian worked late, the company thriving under careful stewardship, protected, just as his sister had intended. The baby who was once seen as an obstacle had become a symbol of truth, of consequence, of how the quietest voice can change everything. If this story kept you watching till the end, make sure you like the video, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and comment below, because sometimes the most shocking moments aren't about what was done, but about who finally spoke up.